The clatter of a dropped fork is not a sound one expects to silence a room of billionaires. In the opulent dining room of the Gilded Sparrow, where whispers of power broker deals worth more than small countries, the sound was like a gunshot. All eyes turned to the head of the table, to Eleanor Vance, the matriarch of the Vance Cosmetics empire. She wasn't looking at her plate of untouched lobster thermidor. Her perfectly composed face, a mask of serene power for over 50 years, was crumbling. Her gaze was fixed, not on a fellow titan of industry, but on a young waitress clearing a nearby table. A waitress whose only remarkable feature was the simple silver locket hanging around her neck. And in that moment, the richest woman in the state of New York, a woman of iron and ice, began to weep. Eleanor Vance existed in a world cushioned by wealth and insulated by routine. Her days were a meticulously orchestrated symphony of board meetings, philanthropic galas, and quiet, lonely evenings in her sprawling penthouse overlooking Central Park. She was a fortress, built brick by brick from the grief and grit of her past. At 82, her hair was a perfect silver coif, her posture ramrod straight, and her eyes the color of a winter sky missed nothing. They could dissect a fraudulent balance sheet from 20 paces or dismiss a sycophantic socialite with a single glacial glance. Tonight was no different. A dinner with investors at the Gilded Sparrow, Manhattan's most exclusive and ludicrously expensive restaurant. The conversation was a familiar drone of stock options, market projections, and feigned laughter. Eleanor merely toyed with her food, a silent empress presiding over her court. Her son Harrison sat to her right, his slick, Gucci-clad charm on full display. He was her only heir, a man who had inherited her ambition but none of her substance. It was during a lull in the conversation, as Harrison was pontificating about a new hostile takeover, that Eleanor's eyes drifted. A young waitress, perhaps in her mid-20s, was moving with a quiet efficiency that Eleanor admired. She had dark, wavy hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her face, though tired, held a warmth that seemed out of place amidst the cold opulence of the restaurant. She was refilling water glasses, her movements graceful and unobtrusive. Then the girl bent down slightly to pick up a fallen napkin, and the pendant she wore swung free from the collar of her uniform. It was silver, a simple locket shaped like a teardrop. The chain was delicate, almost fragile, but it was the engraving on its surface that made the air leave Eleanor's lungs. A single, stylized lily flower, its petals unfurling. Time stopped. The drone of Harrison's voice, the clinking of crystal, the ambient hum of the city far below. It all vanished. Eleanor was no longer in a restaurant. She was in a park, 55 years ago. The sun was warm, the scent of freshly cut grass was in the air, and a little girl with hair the color of spun gold was laughing, her tiny hands reaching for the shiny new locket around her mother's neck. "It's for you, my Lily," Eleanor had whispered, fastening the clasp around her 5-year-old daughter's neck. "So you always remember you are my light." The memory was a physical blow, a phantom pain she had lived with every single day, a wound that never healed, had just been ripped open with the force of a hurricane. The locket. It was identical. It couldn't be. After all these years, the police reports, the private investigators, the decades of dead ends and shattered hopes. It was impossible. Her hand, laden with the weight of a 10-carat diamond ring, trembled as she reached for her water glass. Her breath hitched. A sound, a strangled sob, escaped her lips. "Mother?" Harrison's voice cut through the fog, laced with irritation. "Are you all right? You're making a scene." But Eleanor couldn't hear him. Her universe had shrunk to the silver teardrop hanging around a stranger's neck. The waitress, sensing the intense stare, looked up. Her eyes were a deep, gentle brown. For a fleeting second, they locked with Eleanor's, and the girl offered a small, hesitant smile. That smile was the final blow. It held a shadow of familiarity, a ghostly echo of another smile from a lifetime ago. Eleanor Vance, the unshakable titan, felt the foundations of her fortress crumble to dust. The fork slipped from her numb fingers, clattering onto the porcelain plate. The sound echoed the shattering of her composure. A single tear traced a path through her meticulously applied makeup, Then another, and another. The sobs came then, not loud or hysterical, but deep, ragged, and utterly devastating. The sound of a heart breaking for the second time in a single life. She tried to stand, to speak, to point, but the words wouldn't form. Her vision blurred. The faces around the table swam in a haze of confusion and alarm. The last thing she saw before the world went black was the waitress's look of concern, the silver locket glinting under the soft chandelier light, a beacon in the encroaching darkness. Eleanor Vance had fainted, collapsing into a heap of Chanel tweed and 55 years of unspeakable grief. The smell of antiseptic and starched linen was the first thing that registered. Eleanor's eyes fluttered open to the sterile white ceiling of a hospital room. Not just any room, but the premier suite at Lenox Hill Hospital, the kind reserved for foreign dignitaries and, of course, people like her. Harrison was there, pacing by the window, his phone pressed to his ear. It's a mild exhaustion event. That's the official line. No, the stock won't be affected. I have it under control. He hissed into the receiver before snapping it shut. He turned to her, his expression a mixture of annoyance and feigned concern. Mother, you gave us all quite a scare, he said, straightening his tie. The doctors say you're fine. Just stress. You need to slow down. Eleanor ignored him. The image of the locket was burned onto the inside of her eyelids. The girl, she rasped, her voice weak. The waitress. Harrison sighed, a long-suffering sound she knew well. What about her? The restaurant management was incredibly apologetic. They've already sent a basket. Find her, Eleanor commanded, her voice gaining a sliver of its usual iron. I need to speak with her. Now. Mother, that's absurd. She's a nobody. You fainted from overwork. It has nothing to do with some random server. Harrison, she said, her gaze locking onto his. It was the look that had made CEOs tremble. Do not argue with me. Not about this. Find her. I want her name, her address, everything. Use Arthur. Arthur Covington was Eleanor's personal lawyer and confidant, a man who had been with her for 40 years and knew where all the bodies, both literal and figurative, were buried. He was the one person she trusted implicitly. Mentioning his name meant she was not to be trifled with. Harrison, recognizing defeat, gave a curt nod and left the room, already dialing. 2 days later, Maya Jensen was scrubbing the stubborn grease from the grill at the 24-hour diner, where she worked her second job. Her life was a relentless cycle of exhaustion. She worked 60 hours a week between the high-end Gilded Sparrow and the grimy Morning Star diner to make rent on her tiny Queens apartment and pay for her adoptive mother's mounting medical bills. Sarah, the only mother she'd ever known, was battling a third round of chemotherapy, and the insurance company was fighting them on every new experimental treatment. Maya was still rattled by the incident with the old woman. She'd seen rich people have meltdowns before, but this was different. The woman hadn't been angry or demanding. She'd looked broken, and the way she had stared at Maya, at her locket, had been unsettlingly intense. The bell above the diner door jingled, and a man in a suit that cost more than her car walked in. He looked utterly out of place, a penguin in a pigeon coop. He scanned the room, his eyes landing on her behind the counter. Are you Miss Maya Jensen? He asked, his voice calm and professional. Depends who's asking, Maya said, wiping her hands on her apron, her guard immediately up. If you're from a collections agency, I've already set up a payment plan. The man gave a thin, professional smile. My name is Arthur Covington. I represent Eleanor Vance. Maya's heart did a little flip. The woman from the restaurant? Is she okay? She is recovering, thank you. She has requested a private meeting with you, Miss Jensen, at your earliest convenience. Maya stared at him, bewildered. A meeting? With me? Why? Arthur's expression was unreadable. Mrs. Vance is a woman of particular interests. She was taken by your composure under duress. She wishes to speak with you. You would be compensated for your time, of course. Say $5,000 for 1 hour. $5,000, the number hung in the air, shimmering like a heat haze. That was 2 months' rent. That was the copay for Sarah's next round of treatment. It was a lifeline. But it felt wrong. It felt transactional and strange. Why would she pay me $5,000 just to talk? Maya asked, her suspicion overriding her desperation. As I said, she is a particular woman. She was impressed. Consider it a grant from an admirer of your work ethic, Arthur said smoothly. He slid a pristine business card across the sticky countertop. The meeting would be at her residence tomorrow at 2 o'clock. A car will be sent for you. Please consider it. It would mean a great deal to her. He turned and left as quietly as he had arrived, leaving Maya staring at the card, the smell of old coffee and fried bacon mingling with the phantom scent of impossible money. Her hand instinctively went to the locket at her throat. It was the only thing she had from her birth mother, a gift given to Sarah when she was just an infant left at a church doorstep. It was her only link to a past she knew nothing about. Why had that powerful, heartbroken old woman stared at it like she'd seen a ghost? Against every screaming instinct that told her this was crazy, that this was some bizarre game of the rich, Maya knew she had no choice. Sarah needed that medicine. $5,000 for an hour of conversation? She had to take it. She just prayed it wouldn't cost her more than she was being paid. The car that arrived for Maya the next day wasn't just a car. It was a statement. A black Bentley Mulsanne, so silent it seemed to glide rather than drive, pulled up outside her crumbling apartment building, causing the neighborhood gossips to practically fall out of their windows. The driver, a stoic man in a black suit, held the door for her as if she were royalty. The drive into Manhattan was a journey into another dimension. The world outside the tinted windows transformed from the gritty reality of Queens to the polished, dizzying heights of the Upper East Side. The Bentley finally pulled up to a pre-war building with a limestone facade and a doorman who looked like a retired general. Arthur Covington was waiting for her in the marble-floored lobby. He led her to a private elevator that opened directly into the Vance penthouse. Maya stepped out and forgot to breathe. The apartment was larger than the entire floor of her building. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Central Park that looked like a living painting. The furniture was sleek and minimalist. The art on the walls was museum quality, and the silence was deep and profound. It wasn't a home, it was a monument to wealth. Eleanor Vance was seated in a high-backed armchair near the window, a cashmere throw over her legs. She looked smaller and more fragile than she had in the restaurant, yet the air of authority around her was undiminished. Harrison stood behind her, his arms crossed, his face a mask of simmering resentment. He looked at Maya's simple jeans and worn sweater with undisguised contempt. "Miss Jensen, thank you for coming," Eleanor said, her voice steadier now. "Please sit." Maya perched nervously on the edge of a sofa that probably cost more than her college education. "I was sorry to hear you were unwell, Mrs. Vance. I hope you're feeling better." "I am fine," Eleanor said, cutting through the pleasantries. She gestured a frail, bejeweled hand towards Maya's neck. "Your necklace. May I see it?" The request was direct, almost jarring. Harrison scoffed softly behind his mother. Maya's hand instinctively covered the locket. It felt intensely private, like being asked to show a stranger a birthmark. But she remembered the $5,000, the reason she was here. Slowly, she unclasped the chain and handed it over. Eleanor's hands trembled as she took it. She held it in her palm as if it were a wounded bird. With her thumb, she traced the engraved lily. Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time she held them back. "Where did you get this?" she asked, her voice a raw whisper. "It was my mother's," Maya said carefully. "My adoptive mother, Sarah. She gave it to me on my 16th birthday. She said it was the one thing my birth mother left with me." Eleanor's sharp gaze snapped up to meet hers. "Your birth mother?" "I'm adopted," Maya explained, feeling a familiar pang. "Sarah found me. I don't know anything about my biological family." A heavy silence filled the room. Harrison shifted his weight, radiating impatience. "Mother, this is ridiculous. It's a piece of jewelry. You can buy 10 of them on Fifth Avenue. This girl is clearly trying to spin some sob story for you." "Harrison, be silent," Eleanor commanded without looking at him. Her eyes never left Maya's face. "Tell me about your mother, Sarah. Where did she find you?" "At a church. St. Jude's on the Lower East Side," Maya said. "She was volunteering there. She said I was wrapped in a blanket in a basket, and this locket was pinned to it." There was no note. nothing else. Eleanor closed her eyes, absorbing the information. Every word was another piece of a puzzle she'd thought was lost forever. A church, not a hospital, not a police station. My daughter, Lily, Eleanor began, her voice cracking. She disappeared 55 years ago, from a park right over there. She gestured weakly toward the window. She was 5 years old. She was wearing a locket exactly like this one. I had it specially made for her. There is only one in the world. Maya's blood ran cold. She stared from the locket in the old woman's hand to the heartbroken face looking back at her. 55 years ago? That couldn't be right. Maya was only 24. The timeline made no sense. I don't understand, Maya stammered. I'm only 24. How could this be your daughter's? Perhaps this is a copy. A very good one, Harrison interjected, his voice slick with skepticism. A clever way to prey on a grieving mother's well-known tragedy. It's all over the internet, after all. The story of the lost Vance heiress. I'm not preying on anyone, Maya shot back, her fear turning to anger. I didn't even know who she was until 2 days ago. This locket is mine. Enough, Eleanor's voice cut through the tension. She opened her palm, revealing a tiny, almost invisible clasp on the side of the teardrop locket. Maya had never been able to open it. She'd always assumed it was sealed shut. With a practiced, delicate touch of her fingernail, Eleanor clicked it open. Inside, one half was empty, designed for a tiny photograph. The other half contained a minuscule, impossibly detailed engraving, barely legible to the naked eye. Eleanor held it out. It says, "My Lily, my light," she whispered. Maya leaned in. The words were there, faint and delicate. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was no copy. This was real. But what did it mean? Was she somehow connected to this lost little girl? Was she Lily? But the age was all wrong. Before Maya could process the swirling vortex of confusion, Eleanor made a decision. She looked at Maya, her eyes filled with a desperate, burgeoning hope that terrified and captivated Maya in equal measure. You mentioned your mother, Sarah, is ill, Eleanor said, her tone shifting from grief to business. I want to help. I will cover all of her medical expenses, every last cent, the best doctors, the best treatments, whatever she needs. It's yours. Maya was stunned into silence. Harrison looked apoplectic. Mother, you can't be serious. You're going to hand over a blank check to this stranger based on a trinket? I am not asking for your permission, Harrison, Eleanor said coolly. She turned back to Maya. I ask for only one thing in return. Allow me to look into this. Let me speak with your mother. Let me hire people to search the records of St. Jude's. Give me the chance to find out the truth about this locket, no matter where it leads. It was an offer that could save her mother's life, but it was also an invitation into a world of pain, secrets, and unimaginable wealth. Maya looked at the powerful old woman, at her furious son, and at the tiny silver locket that held the key to a past she never knew she had. Her own life was about to be turned upside down, and she had a terrifying feeling it would never be the same again. The next few days were a blur for Maya. True to her word, Eleanor Vance moved with the speed and efficiency of a military operation. Within hours, Sarah Jensen was transferred from the crowded county hospital to the same private suite at Lenox Hill that Eleanor had occupied. A team of the country's top oncologists was assembled, poring over her charts. For the first time in years, Maya felt a flicker of hope for her mother's health, a feeling so potent it almost eclipsed the dizzying strangeness of her new reality. Eleanor, meanwhile, had unleashed Arthur Covington. He and a team of private investigators descended upon the archives of St. Jude's Church and the city's dusty records. Eleanor's theory was a fragile, desperate one, that her daughter Lily had not been abducted and murdered, as the police had long presumed, but had somehow survived, grown up, and had a child of her own, Maya. It would mean Lily would have been in her early 30s when Maya was born, a woman living in the shadows. It was a wild, improbable hope, but it was the first hope Eleanor had allowed herself to feel in half a century. While Arthur's team dug into the past, Eleanor requested to speak with Sarah. Maya, sitting by her mother's bedside in the plush hospital room, gently explained the situation. Sarah, frail and weary from the chemotherapy, listened with wide eyes. Her hand, thin as a bird's claw, clutched Maya's. "The locket," Sarah whispered, her voice raspy. "I always knew it was special. She was so scared, Maya, the woman who gave you to me." Maya's breath caught. "Woman? Mom, you always said you just found me." Sarah squeezed her hand, a tear rolling down her wrinkled cheek. "I lied. To protect you. I was so afraid they would take you away from me if I told the truth. I was a young widow, barely scraping by. They wouldn't have let me keep you. Tell me now, Mom," Maya pleaded. "Please." "It was a cold night," Sarah began, her eyes distant. "I was locking up the church kitchen. A young woman stumbled in from the side alley. She was thin, pale, and looked terrified. She was carrying a baby. You. She pushed you into my arms. She said, 'Please keep her safe. Don't let him find her.' She took the locket from her own neck and pinned it to your blanket. Before I could even ask her name, she was gone, vanished back into the night." "Did you see what she looked like?" Eleanor asked, her voice gentle. She was seated on the other side of the bed, having arrived with Maya. Sarah shook her head. "It was dark. She wore a hood. But her eyes! I remember her eyes. They were blue. A sad, stormy blue." Eleanor flinched as if struck. Lily's eyes had been the exact color of a stormy sky. While this emotional excavation was happening, Harrison Vance was conducting his own investigation. He saw Maya not as a potential family member, but as a clear and present threat to his inheritance and his position. He hired a notoriously sleazy private investigator, a man named Rick Slater, with one simple directive: find dirt on Maya Jensen. Anything and everything. Slater was good at his job. He dug into Maya's sealed juvenile records, her credit history, her social media, everything. And he found something. When Maya was 19, she had been arrested. She had been dating a boy who had shoplifted a camera from an electronics store, and she'd been in the car when he was caught. The charges were dropped when her boyfriend confessed she had nothing to do with it, but the arrest record was still there. He also found that she had co-signed a loan for her mother's first round of treatment and had fallen behind on the payments, leading to a poor credit score. It was thin, but in Harrison's hands it could be spun into a weapon. A juvenile arrest? A history of debt? To a man like Harrison, it was the perfect narrative. A desperate, down-on-her-luck girl with a criminal past who concocted a scheme to defraud a wealthy, grieving old woman. He gathered Slater's findings, his lips curling into a cruel, triumphant smile. He would wait for the perfect moment to deploy his ammunition, a moment when it would cause the most damage to Maya's credibility and his mother's fragile hope. He would crush this little waitress before she could cost him a single penny of what was rightfully his. Unaware of the storm brewing, Eleanor and Maya were bonding in the quiet hospital room. They talked for hours, sharing stories. Eleanor spoke of Lily as a little girl, her laugh, her love for strawberry ice cream, her fear of thunderstorms. Maya spoke of her life with Sarah, simple, full of love, but always shadowed by the question of where she came from. A few days later, Arthur Covington returned with his initial findings. "We've confirmed the timeline," he told Eleanor and Maya in the hospital waiting area. "St. Jude's records show an anonymous infant was left on the date Sarah Jensen specified. The police were notified, but with no leads, the case went cold. She was eventually put into the foster system, where Sarah Jensen formally adopted her 6 months later." He paused, taking a deep breath. "The bigger news is from the old case files on Lily's disappearance. I had a forensics team re-examine the ransom note that was sent a week after she was taken. It was always believed to be a hoax because the kidnappers never made contact again." "What about it?" Eleanor asked, her hands clenched. "The handwriting," Arthur said, sliding a folder across the table. "I took a sample of your late husband's signature from some old company documents. And I took one of your brothers, Robert, from his will." Eleanor looked confused. "Robert? My brother has been dead for 30 years. What does he have to do with this?" "The analysis is preliminary," Arthur said carefully, "but the expert believes there is a high probability that certain letter formations in the ransom note are a match. Not to a stranger, but to your brother Robert." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Uncle Robert, her kind, gentle younger brother who had always been in the shadow of her and her husband's success. The man who had cried with her for weeks after Lily was taken? It was impossible. It was unthinkable. That can't be, Eleanor whispered, her face pale. He was heavily in debt at the time of his death, Arthur continued grimly. Gambling debts we never knew about. He might have been desperate. The theory was monstrous. Had her own brother staged a kidnapping for ransom, only for it to go horribly wrong? Did he panic? What did he do with Lily? The re-emerged hope in Eleanor's heart was now tangled with a new horrifying thread of betrayal. The past was not just a place of sadness, but a labyrinth of dark secrets. And at its center was the locket, the one piece of truth that had started it all, now leading them into ever deeper, more dangerous waters. The revelation about Uncle Robert sent a shockwave through Eleanor. The idea that her own brother could have been involved in Lily's disappearance was a betrayal so profound it threatened to undo her completely. Yet it also lit a fire in her. If Lily had been taken not by a stranger, but by family, it changed everything. It made the possibility of her survival, of her running away years later as a young woman, seem less like a fantasy. There was only one way to know for sure if Maya was truly connected to her. A DNA test, Eleanor stated one afternoon, her voice firm. She was looking at Maya, her expression a painful mix of hope and terror. It's the only way to have an undeniable truth, for both of us. Maya didn't hesitate. The question surrounding her birth had been a constant low hum in the background of her entire life. Now the volume had been turned up to a roar. She needed to know too. Yes, she agreed. Let's do it. The test was arranged with clinical discretion. A doctor came to the penthouse, and samples were taken from both Eleanor and Maya. They were told the results would take a week that promised to feel like a lifetime. As Eleanor and Maya braced themselves for the truth, Harrison decided it was time to strike. He saw the growing bond between his mother and the waitress. He saw the millions being spent on Sarah's medical care. And he saw his future inheritance dwindling with every passing day. He could not risk the DNA test coming back as a match. He had to poison the well, and he had to do it now. He picked up the phone and called a contact he kept for just such occasions, a ruthless editor at the city's most voracious gossip tabloid, the New York Chronicle. 2 days later, the headline hit the newsstands like a bomb. Vance IRS scam, grieving billionaire Eleanor Vance targeted by waitress with criminal past. The article was a masterpiece of character assassination. It painted Maya as a cunning, manipulative grifter. It detailed her juvenile arrest, twisting it to sound like a serious crime rather than a youthful mistake. It spoke of her crushing debt, framing her financial struggles not as a sign of her devotion to her sick mother, but as a motive for a cold, calculated fraud. The story quoted anonymous sources close to the family, clearly Harrison, who expressed deep concern that the vulnerable, grief-stricken Eleanor was being taken advantage of. It even included a grainy photo of Maya in her diner uniform, looking tired and stressed, making her appear haggard and desperate. Maya saw the paper while grabbing coffee before heading to the hospital. When she saw her own face on the cover, her world swam. Her hands shook so badly she spilled coffee all over the counter. Strangers were staring at her, whispering. The shame and humiliation were suffocating. She rushed to the Vance penthouse, the tabloid clutched in her hand, tears of rage and hurt streaming down her face. She found Eleanor in the living room, staring out the window, a copy of the same paper on the table beside her. "Did you believe it?" Maya asked, her voice trembling. "Even for a second." Eleanor didn't turn around. Her reflection in the glass was like a statue of ice. "Harrison showed it to me this morning," she said, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. "He presented your arrest record, your debts. He told me he was only trying to protect me." "And you believed him?" Maya pressed, her heart sinking. "He is my son," Eleanor said softly. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. He was her son, and Maya was a stranger with a criminal record and money problems who had appeared out of nowhere with a story that was too good to be true. "The locket, our conversations. You felt it too, I know you did," Maya cried, desperate. "You can't let him do this." Finally, Eleanor turned. Her face was a canvas of conflict and exhaustion. The flicker of hope that had animated her for the past week was gone. replaced by the old familiar mask of weary sadness. "What I feel is not evidence, Maya," she said, her voice cracking. "I am an old woman who has been blinded by grief for 55 years. Perhaps Harrison is right. Perhaps my hope has made me a fool." The words struck Maya harder than any tabloid headline. She had allowed herself to believe in this connection, to see in Eleanor a link to the family she never had. She had dared to hope, and now it was all turning to ash. "So that's it?" Maya said, her voice barely a whisper. "You're just going to let him win? You're going to throw me out because of his lies?" "The DNA results will be here in a few days," Eleanor stated, avoiding the question. "The truth will be revealed then. Until that time, perhaps it is best if we keep our distance." It was a dismissal, a cold, clinical severing of the fragile bond they had formed. Maya stared at the woman she had started to think of as her grandmother, her heart shattering into a million pieces. She had been naive to think she could ever belong in this world of secrets, betrayal, and cutthroat ambition. With a choked sob, she turned and fled the penthouse, leaving Eleanor alone with her doubts, the poisonous tabloid lying between them like a snake. The wait for the DNA results had just become an agony of suspicion and heartbreak. The days that followed were the longest of Maya's life. She felt like a ghost haunting her own existence. The staff at the hospital were now wary of her, their polite smiles replaced with suspicious glances. Her co-workers at the diner either avoided her or asked invasive questions. The tabloid story had branded her, and the stain felt permanent. She continued to visit her mother, but she couldn't bring herself to tell Sarah what had happened. She just sat by the bedside, the weight of Eleanor's doubt pressing down on her. In the Vance penthouse, the silence was just as heavy. Eleanor had confined herself to her rooms, refusing to see Harrison. She was adrift in a sea of uncertainty. Every time she allowed herself to remember the warmth in Maya's eyes, Harrison's venomous words would echo in her mind. "A grifter, a criminal, preying on you." She was torn between a lifetime of cynical caution and a single, desperate spark of hope. Finally, the day came. Arthur Covington arrived at the penthouse, a sealed FedEx envelope in his briefcase. He found Eleanor sitting alone in the vast living room, looking out at the city. "The results are here," he said quietly. Eleanor simply nodded, unable to speak. Her hands were clasped so tightly in her lap, her knuckles were white. Arthur opened the envelope and unfolded the document. He was a man of law, of facts and figures, but even his stoic demeanor couldn't hide the gravity of the moment. He read through the technical jargon, his eyes scanning for the conclusion. He found it. He looked up at Eleanor, and for the first time in their 40-year association, she saw tears welling in her lawyer's eyes. "It's a 99.999% probability," Arthur said, his voice thick with emotion. "Mitochondrial DNA is passed down from mother to child. The link is undeniable. Maya Jensen is the daughter of your daughter, Lily. Eleanor, she is your granddaughter." The words washed over Eleanor, not with a crash, but with a quiet, profound certainty that settled deep in her soul. It was true. Her heart, her instincts, had been right all along. A choked sob escaped her, a sound not of grief, but of overwhelming, earth-shattering relief. The hope she had been so terrified to embrace was real. She had a granddaughter. A piece of her Lily was alive. At that exact moment, across town at Lenox Hill, Maya was holding her mother's hand. Sarah was weak, the latest round of treatment having taken its toll, but her mind was clear. "Maya," Sarah whispered, pulling her daughter closer, "I have to tell you the rest. I was afraid before, but I'm not afraid anymore." "The rest? Mom, what are you talking about?" "The woman who gave you to me," Sarah said, her breath shallow. "I told Mrs. Vance I didn't see her face clearly. Another lie. I did. She was standing in the light from the church kitchen for just a moment. I saw her face, and I saw the man she was running from." Maya leaned in, her heart pounding. "A man. He was in the alley. He didn't see me. He was shouting her name. 'Lily,' he screamed. 'You can't run from me, Lily.'" Sarah's eyes were wide with the 55-year-old memory of fear. He was big, intimidating. He had a look of pure rage on his face. And Maya, I recognized him. I had seen his picture in the papers years before. when they were reporting on the Vance kidnapping. Who was it? Maya breathed. It was her uncle, Sarah whispered, the name a curse on her lips. Robert Vance. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Robert hadn't just kidnapped Lily for ransom, he had kept her. He had held her captive for years. And Lily, as a young woman, had escaped, pregnant and terrified, long enough to give her baby to a kind stranger in a church kitchen before being dragged back into the nightmare, or worse. It wasn't a simple kidnapping. It was a dark, twisted secret kept within the family. Lily hadn't just disappeared. She had been stolen by one of their own and had given birth to Maya while living in that hell. A nurse entered the room, interrupting the moment. Maya Jensen, a call for you at the front desk. It's urgent. And Arthur Covington. Maya's hand trembled as she took the phone. Maya, Arthur's voice was gentle but firm. I need you to come to the penthouse immediately. The results are in. It's time for you to come home. Maya hung up the phone, her mind reeling. The DNA results were in. Her mother's confession had revealed the monstrous truth. She was a Vance, and her grandmother had a right to know what her own brother had done. The lies were over. It was time for a reckoning. The ride to the penthouse was a silent storm inside Maya's mind. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold and red, a chaotic backdrop to the maelstrom of her thoughts. She was a Vance. The words echoed with the force of a tidal wave, reshaping the entire landscape of her identity. But the name brought no joy, only a chilling, profound sorrow. It was the name of her mother and also the name of the monster who had stolen her life. Her hand rested on the worn leather of the Bentley seat, and she felt like an imposter, a ghost from a forgotten tragedy about to haunt the halls of the living. She wasn't just going to meet a grandmother, she was going to deliver a verdict that had been 55 years in the making. Arthur met her at the private elevator, his usually impassive face etched with a deep, compassionate understanding. He didn't offer platitudes or congratulations. He simply said, "She's waiting for you." And the quiet gravity of his tone told Maya that he understood this was not just a reunion, but a reckoning. The doors opened, and Maya stepped into the vast, silent living room. Eleanor was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, a lone, silver-haired figure silhouetted against the glittering tapestry of the Manhattan skyline. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then slowly she turned. All the ice, all the doubt that had been in her eyes during their last encounter had melted away, leaving behind a raw, unguarded vulnerability. Her face was a landscape of grief and wonder, of decades of pain warring with a fragile, burgeoning joy. Her eyes, the color of a winter sky, were flooded with unshed tears as they drank in the sight of Maya. Not as a waitress, not as a suspect, but as family, as Lily's legacy. She opened her arms, a silent, trembling invitation across the expanse of polished marble. Maya's own defenses, built up over a lifetime of uncertainty and the recent agony of public humiliation, crumbled to dust. She walked, then half ran, into her grandmother's embrace. They held each other tightly, a silent communication of sorrow and relief passing between them. Eleanor was so frail, yet her grip was like iron, as if she were afraid Maya might vanish like a dream. Maya could feel the faint tremor in the old woman's body, the shuddering breaths that were 55 years of pent-up grief finally being released. "I'm so sorry," Eleanor whispered, her voice thick and broken, her words muffled in Maya's hair. "I am so sorry I ever doubted you. I let his poison in. I let my fear win. Can you ever forgive me?" "There's nothing to forgive," Maya wept, clinging to her. "I was so scared. I thought I had lost you before I even had a chance to know you." They pulled apart, though their hands remained linked, an unbreakable chain. Eleanor gently cupped Maya's face, her thumb tracing her cheekbone. "I see her in you," she said, her voice filled with awe. "Your mother. She's right here, in your eyes." The mention of her mother brought the second, heavier truth crashing back to the forefront of Maya's mind. "Eleanor," she began, her voice gaining a new solemn strength, "the DNA test. It only tells half the story. My mom, Sarah, she told me everything. You need to know what really happened to Lily." They sat down on the large white sofa, the city lights twinkling below them like a silent, indifferent audience. Maya recounted Sarah's story in painstaking detail. The terrified young woman stumbling into the church, the baby pushed into a stranger's arms, the desperate plea to keep her safe. And then, the darkest part, the man in the alley shouting Lily's name, his face contorted in rage. The man Sarah recognized as Robert Vance. As Maya spoke, Eleanor's face transformed from wonder to shock, and then to a chilling, incandescent fury. The betrayal was a physical thing, twisting her features into a mask of cold horror. It wasn't just a kidnapping. It wasn't a ransom gone wrong. Her brother had been a captor, a monster who had hidden in plain sight, offering condolences and crocodile tears while her daughter suffered in some unknown prison. He kept her, Eleanor breathed, the words tasting like ash. All those years he was at family dinners, he held my hand at memorials, and he had her, my sweet girl. Her gaze drifted to a silver-framed photograph on the mantelpiece, a young laughing Lily. The image was now tainted, a monument to a crime more depraved than she had ever imagined. Harrison is in the study, Eleanor said, her voice dropping to a dangerously quiet tone. He has been waiting, confident that his lies had won. A new hard light entered her eyes, a fire Maya had not seen before, the fire that had built an empire. He will not be expecting us. He will not be expecting the truth. They rose and walked towards the heavy oak doors of the study, their footsteps echoing softly in the cavernous apartment. They were no longer just a grandmother and granddaughter. They were allies, bound by a shared purpose. Harrison was standing by a mahogany bar, swirling a glass of amber liquid. The shattered whiskey tumbler had been cleaned up, but the stench of his arrogance still lingered in the air. He turned as they entered, a smug, patronizing smile on his face. "Mother," he started, his voice dripping with condescension. "I'm glad you've come to your senses. Now that you've sent this person on her way, we can begin the damage control from this unfortunate episode." "The DNA results came back, Harrison," Eleanor said. Her voice was calm, but it cut through the air like a shard of glass. "It's a definitive match. Maya is Lily's daughter. She is my granddaughter. She is a Vance." The smug smile on Harrison's face froze, then collapsed. He stared at them, his complexion turning a pasty white. The blood drained from his face so fast he seemed to shrink before their eyes. "No," he stammered, shaking his head in frantic denial. "That's not possible. The lab must have made a mistake. Or you've been duped. The sample was switched. She forged it." "The truth isn't something you can buy your way out of, Harrison," Eleanor said coldly. "And it's not the only truth we learned today," Maya added, her voice ringing with clarity and conviction. She stepped forward, her eyes locking onto his. "My mother wasn't abducted by a stranger and she didn't run away. She was being held captive. She escaped just long enough to save me." "Captive? What are you talking about? This is insane. A desperate fairy tale." Harrison spat, gesturing wildly with his free hand. "She was running from your uncle," Maya said, letting the name drop into the room like a stone. "Robert Vance." The name hit Harrison like a physical blow. He stumbled backward, his back hitting the bar. It was then that Eleanor saw it. In the flash of panic in his eyes, it wasn't just shock at the revelation. It was the terror of a secret unearthed, a memory ugly and deep, surfacing against his will. "You knew," Eleanor whispered, the realization dawning on her with a sickening, final horror. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. "My God, you knew!" Harrison's face crumpled. The last of his bluster evaporated, leaving behind a pathetic, trembling shell of a man. "I was a teenager," he pleaded, his voice cracking, looking at his mother like a cornered child. "Just a boy. I went to his country house one weekend. To ask for money, he was always an easy touch. I heard noises from the basement, a woman crying." Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth, a stifled sob escaping her. "He told me it was faulty pipes," Harrison continued, the words tumbling out in a torrent of long-suppressed guilt. "But I didn't believe him. I looked through a crack in the door. And I saw her. It was Lily. She was older, so thin. She looked like a ghost. I was so scared. Robert caught me. He grabbed me. He told me that if I ever said a word, he would ruin us. He said he had proof that Dad's first big patent was stolen, that the entire company was built on a lie and he would expose it all. He said he'd see us all on the street. He sank into a leather armchair, his face in his hands. What could I do? I was a coward. I ran. I never told anyone. I tried to forget I ever saw her. Silence. Deep, profound, and damning. He had chosen money over a human life. He had chosen his inheritance over his own cousin's freedom. He had walked away, leaving Lily to her fate in that dark basement. Eleanor looked at her son, and for the first time she felt absolutely nothing for him. No anger, no love, no pity. Just a vast, cold emptiness. He was a stranger to her, a hollow man defined by his own moral rot. Get out, she said, her voice quiet but utterly final. Pack a bag. I want you out of this house tonight. Mother, please, he whimpered. It was so long ago. I was just a boy. A boy makes a mistake, Eleanor said, her voice rising with a terrible, controlled rage. A man lives with the consequences of his choices. You have been living a lie your entire life, profiting from the silence that kept my daughter imprisoned. You didn't just stay silent then. You tried to silence her daughter now. You tried to poison me against my own blood. You are not my son. A son could never have done this. She walked to her desk and picked up the phone. Arthur, please come to the study. Yes, begin the proceedings immediately. Harrison is to be removed from the board, his access to all company accounts frozen, and he is to be written out of my will, effective immediately. Harrison stared at her, his face a mask of disbelief turning to pure, snarling hatred as he realized it was all over. He rose to his feet, his eyes wild. You'll regret this. You're choosing this gutter trash over your own son. She has more integrity in her little finger than you have in your entire body, Eleanor retorted, her gaze unflinching. Now get out of my sight. Defeated, Harrison stumbled out of the room, a ghost of a man exorcised from the family he had so thoroughly betrayed. In the ringing silence that followed his departure, Eleanor, Maya, and Arthur stood together. The air in the room felt lighter, cleaner. The decades-old poison had finally been lanced. Eleanor walked over to Maya and took her hand again, her touch gentle and warm. This is your home now, she said softly. Our home. She led Maya over to the mantelpiece and picked up the photograph of young Lily. We may never know why Robert did what he did. We may never know how Lily's story ended. But we will try. I swear to you, we will not stop until we find the truth. For her. Maya looked from the smiling girl in the photograph to the determined, resilient woman beside her, her grandmother. The locket around her neck seemed to warm against her skin. The past was a landscape of unimaginable pain, but for the first time, the future held a flicker of something she had never allowed herself to feel before. The promise of belonging. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. But in the penthouse, high above the city, it felt like the dawn of a new, uncertain, but hopeful day. The story of Eleanor and Maya is more than just a tale of secrets and lies. It's a powerful testament to the unbreakable bonds of family and the healing power of truth. Their journey reminds us that hope can be found in the most unexpected places, and that even after decades of darkness, the light of connection can find a way to shine through. They found each other against all odds. Two women from different worlds, united by a single silver locket and the enduring legacy of a woman they both loved. Their new mission to uncover the final chapter of Lily's life has only just begun. If this story of loss, resilience, and the incredible discovery of family touched your heart, please let us know by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who needs a story of hope and determination. And to follow more incredible true life stories that will move and inspire you, make sure you click subscribe and turn on notifications. Your support allows us to keep bringing these powerful narratives to light. Thank you for listening.